Hello! Today's lesson is going to be about 16th notes. We've already touched on all the other notes on this page that you haven't, the only one you haven't seen yet is the 16th note right at the bottom of this slide. So if we start at the 16th note, two 16th notes added together equals an eighth note. Two eighth notes added together equals a quarter note. Two quarter notes added together equals a half note, and two half notes added together equals a whole note. And we know that we've been working mainly when we do our rhythms from the eighth note pulse or the quarter note beat. So two pulses fit in one beat. And if we get those together, it's a little complicated, but let's just do some eighth notes. T, 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 T. And if we were to do quarter notes, we tie two eighth notes together. So that would be two pulses, but still one beat. Ta, 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 ta. Half notes get four eighth note pulses or two of these beats. Ta, ta. And those can add together, two half notes tied together, equal a whole note, which is eight pulses or four quarter note beats. Ta. So if you look down at the bottom, 16th notes are way smaller. There's 16 of them that fit into one whole note. So we're going to change how we do it. So if we say T, 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 T for eighth notes, and we say ta for quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, then I'm going to have you say D, 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 a D-I for 16th notes. Now, if your mouth gets tripped up on the words as we're doing this today, that's okay. It might happen. It'll happen to me. And if you say the wrong word, if you say ta when you meant to say T, etc., that's okay. It might happen. So let's just practice 16th notes. Keep the eighth note pulse. And let's start with eighth notes. Do some eighth notes. T, 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 T. Now, can you keep the hand moving with the eighth note and say D, 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 D. So there's two D's for every one of these. Try that. D, 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 D. And if you found that your hand was going D, 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 that's okay. It's not wrong. Just know that you're doing the 16th note pulse now instead of the eighth note. Sometimes I have people take two fingers and go D, 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 because that seems to make it a little bit easier on them. So moving forward onto the next slide, there's really no good place for me to have my face in this, so I'm just going to move me out of the way. All right, so this slide just has you alternating between eighth notes and 16th notes. Let's try it together, and let's see if you can do it just keeping that eighth note pulse. So like that. Here we go. 1 and 2 and ready, go. T, 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 D, 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 line 3, T, 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 line 4, D, 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 D. How'd you do? I want you to go ahead and do this slide one more time without me. I'll keep the pulse for you. You keep the pulse too. 1, 2, ready, go. Line 2. Line 3. Line 4. If you need to pause that and do it again, go ahead and do that. All right, so now we're going to mix up our T's and our D's. So if we say T for eighth notes and D for 16th notes, let's just try this one little block of notes. Ready? T, D. Try that again. T, D. So let's just do line 1. 1, 2, ready, go. T, D, T, D, T, D, T, D. Okay, line 2, you've got it. Ready, and T, 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 T. How do you think line 3 might sound? We start with two 16th notes and then go to an eighth note. Go ahead and try it on your own. Really try it. If you said that this group of notes sounds like DDT, 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 you'd be correct. So let's start back at the top and do all 4 lines. 1, 2, ready, go. T, DDT, 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 DDT. T, 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 T. DDT, 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 T, 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 T. If you see my mouse, my pointer, kind of slowing down or jumping all over the place, it's a lagging issue. Sorry. All right. So your turn. I'm going to count again, and I'll call off the lines, and you do the whole slide by yourself. Line 1. 1, 2, ready, go. Line 2. Line 3. Line 4. Done. All right, again, if you need to pause it and do that slide again, do it. Now it's starting to look complicated. The new thing on the page is what? I'm circling it right now. What is that? If you said 16th rest, you'd be correct. So just like the 16th note has 2 bars at the top, the 16th rest has 2 little heads to it. Just do line 1 for right now. Ready? D D D D D D D D D D D D D D. Line 2, I think you can do as well. Ready? T T T T T T T T. All right. Line 3. It's a little harder. So we're gonna go D D D D D D D D D D D D. I gotta move my picture. There's a little D at the end of that. Try line 3. Ready? Line 3, 2, ready, go. D D D D D D D D D D D D. And then line 4. This is where it gets confusing. Line 4. Look at, we have 2 16th notes tied together. 2 16th notes tied together equals what? Say it out loud. 1 8th note. So we have to switch words here. In line 4 it goes DT, D, DT, D, DT, D, DT, D. If you messed up the words in that, please do not worry about that. All right. Just closing out some other windows so that you can, maybe I'll stop lagging as much. Here we go. Line 1. Actually, let's practice lines 3 and 4 together first. Ready? 2, ready, go. D, 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 D. Now try line 4. D, T, D, D, T, D, D, T, D, D, T, D. Let's try all the lines, starting with line 1. 1 and 2 and ready and go. D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D T T T T T T T T D D D D D D D D D D D T D D T D D T D D T D. How'd you do? I'm surprised I made it through. I don't think I messed up, but I don't know. Do it again without me this time. I'll keep the pulse. Ready? 1, 2, line 1, go. Line 2. Line 3. Line 4. If you need to pause it and do that again, or rewind it and watch me do it again, please do so. Okay. Some more rests here. So let's just do line 1. It's all 16th notes. Ready? Go. D D D D D D D D D D D D D D. Look at line 2. We have a D D, rest, rest, D D, rest, rest. So 1 pulse is D Ds, 1 pulse is rest, rest. You can say rest, rest if you want, or ch, ch. Let's put the ch in because that makes it a little cleaner than rest, rest. 1, 2, line 2, go. D D, ch, ch, D D, ch, ch, D D, ch, ch, D D, ch, ch. Now here you can go D D, ch, D D, ch, dee, ch, dee, ch. Just like we know 2/16 notes equals an eighth note if they're tied together, 2/16 rests equal an eighth rest. They don't have to be tied together because a rest is the absence of sound. So really, line 2 and line 3 are exactly the same. They are just written differently. Let's try line 3. Ready? And dee, ch, dee, ch, dee, ch, dee, ch. Okay. Now let's try this. How many 16th notes are tied together? Hold it up on your fingers or say it out loud. How many 16th notes are tied together? If you said 3, you'd be correct. And now, anything more than 1/16th note, we say T, correct? Anything more than an eighth note, we say ta, correct? In this case, I don't care what you say, because this is 3/16th notes tied together. So 2/16th notes tied together equals an eighth note. So 3/16th notes tied together is a little more than an eighth note. So we should technically say ta. So it should be dee ta, dee ta, dee ta, dee ta. But if you say dee dee, dee dee, dee dee, dee dee, do you hear my voice doing that little pulse? That's fine. Or dee tee, dee tee, dee tee, dee tee. The words are not as important as the actual rhythm. All right? So try that bottom line. I'm going to say dee-ta. Bottom line. Ready and go. Dee-ta, 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 dee-ta. All right, go to the top line. Here we go. 1, 2, whole page, go. Dee 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 dee. Done. All right, I'm going to keep it. You do that slide by yourself. 1, 2, ready, and go. Line 1. Line 2. Line 3. Line 4. Done. Again, you need to pause it. Do it. Here we go. All right, these two rhythms above are the same. Let me move my picture. How can we rewrite these rhythms without the ties? What do you know about when 3 notes are tied together? What do you know about that? What have we done in the past 2 rhythm lessons? Say it out loud or write it down. Make sure you're not just thinking in your head. Either involve kinesthetic or auditory process. So 3/16th notes tied together. Well, we already know 2/16th notes tied together equals an eighth note. So we could put that eighth note here. Well, here's that 3rd 16th note. So these are the same. Dee-ta, 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 dee-ta. Now dee-ta, 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 dee-ta. On a scrap piece of paper or something, write down what you think this rhythm would look like without the ties. What can we use to rewrite it? What have we learned about when there's 3 of something tied together? Yeah, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you said it was a dotted eighth note, you were correct. A dot next to any note means its duration equals 3 of the next smallest note tied together. So a dot next to an eighth note means it equals 3 eighth notes tied together. So let's start on the right side of this equation over here. So we have a dot next to an eighth note. Well, we could think of that as a 16th note tied to an eighth note like we saw on the previous slide, or we can think of it as 3/16th notes tied together. When we're thinking of it this way, it's called subdividing. All right, next few slides have rhythms from your song for Fall Festival. If you're in 7th and 8th grade, it's your second song. If you're in 6th grade, it's your first song. On the sheet music, they look very confusing because of all the 16th notes. There's a lot of ink on the page when every note has 2 flags or 2 beams across the top. The best way to learn them is going to be by rote, meaning I sing it, you sing it back, and we just keep trying it. But we're going to break down some of the rhythms now, just so you know that it's not as difficult as it looks when you first get it. You will have already done some of the hardest parts right here in this rhythm practice. Okay, so I think one of the most confusing things, let me move me up and over here. One of the most confusing things on this is that there are ties between measures in the music. So in this case, there are ties over lines. So this is actually starting a new measure down in the bottom right corner. So if we count 1 and 2 and ready and quarter rest, get 2 snaps. Dee ta ta, snap, snap. Dee ta ta, dee ta 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 ta, ti ti dee ta. Okay, now the words that came out of my mouth were not correct. They were just not correct. The rhythms were fine, but the words were not. And like I said, it doesn't matter to me what you say. So, dita, dita, top of this first line here, it's called a pickup because we have all these rests before it, and the song starts at the end of a measure, so it's a pickup measure. Dita, ta, rest. Let's try that. That rhythm, that little dita, half note, quarter note rest happens over and over in the song. So let's just start right on this. Let's actually start with these 2 snaps right before it. Before we get there, tell me how many pulses this half note gets. Say it out loud or show me, or hold up your fingers. Even though I'm not in the room with you, still do it. 4. Okay, right here. Ready, go. Dee ta ta. Dee ta ta. Now let's look at this. Let's break it down. How many eighth notes are tied together here? Sorry, 16th notes. How many 16th notes? 2. So we'd say D, T, T. Here's an eighth note. Do you notice it only has, it looks confusing because it's in the middle. It goes 16th, 8th, 16th. D, T, T, T. Well, in here, it's, look over the line. It's 1 16th note tied to an eighth note. So that's a dotted eighth note. So D, T, T, ta, ta. And then this gets 1, 2, 3, 4 pulses down at the bottom. An eighth note tied to a quarter note tied to an eighth note. What? That's a lot to look at and think on the spot, which is why we're doing this now and why I said learning by rote will be the best. Sometimes when you get music with a lot of syncopation like this, things happening on the offbeats, that's syncopation, it's better to just feel the rhythm. And we'll get there, but I want you to know the math behind it. Yes, there is math in music. All right. So right here, it would be D, T, T, ta, ta, T, D, T, T, oh, no. D, T, T, ta. So this gets 4 pulses plus a half a pulse. This is why it's better to feel it. Let's try this whole page again, starting at the very first quarter rest, top line. Ready, go. D, ta, 4, 3, 2, 1. Dee ta ta, dee ti ti ta ta, ti 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 ta. Done. Let's do this slide again. Just start right on this quarter note, at the third quarter rest at the top of the page. Ready? Go. Dee ta ta, dee ta ta. D, T, T, ta, ta, D, T, T, ta. Done. Okay. And that's going to go a lot faster. So listen how it is faster. 1 and 2 and D, ta, ta, D, ta, ta, D, T, T, ta, ta, D, ta, T, ta. Done. And I said it wrong. I said a ta where I was supposed to say a T. It's okay. All right. I think this is our last slide. This is from a whole different part of the song. So let's go through each note and tell me how many eighth note pulses. 1 for the eighth note. How many for a quarter note? Say it out loud. 2, eighth note. 1, quarter note, 2. Let's do this together. So 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, ready, go. Ti, ta, ti, ta. Again, go. Ti, ta, ti, ta. Good. Now we have dee 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 ta ta. So we say ta, dee 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 here because it's 3/16 notes. At the end of the first line, this 16th note, we say ta because it ties to the 8th note. A 16th note tied to the 8th note equals 3/16 notes or a dotted 8th note. But you can't just write it as a dotted 8th note because it goes over a measure line. If your brain is swimming, mine is too. That's okay. Start right on that 16th note. Here we go. Dee 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 ta ta. And it's a half rest, so same as a half note, it gets 4 pulses, but we snap because we're resting. So let's do just the first 2 lines. If you'll notice, line 1 and 2 are the same as line 3 and 4. It repeats. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Ti ta, dee dee ta ta. Rest, 2, 3, again. Dee ta, dee dee ta ta. Rest, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that again. Whole page, a little faster. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Ti ta, dee dee ta ta. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ti ta, dee dee ta ta. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is the chorus of the song, so that repeats a lot too, just like that first slide did. And we are at the end of the slideshow. And we are at the end of the recording now. Rewind and redo anything you need to redo.